All right, welcome back to later 20th century and contemporary literature. All right, picking up where we left off. So one of the ways that leaders like Hitler were able to, or these, dictator leaders or fascistic leaders were able to take power in their countries was they not only did they offer hope with the programs that they promised, like for example, people in Germany say, "Well, Hitler made the trains run on time again," and Germany in particular was just absolutely sidelined by World War One. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had been broken up, and Germany was, came out of that war as, you know, just really hammered economically. Like the inflation that went through Germany then was astronomical. There are stories that people would have to take wheelbarrow, wheelbarrowfuls, fill, wait, hold on, let me say that again. Wheelbarrowfuls of money to the store just to shop. Like because their money had uh become so devalued, that like where it maybe cost $1 to buy a loaf of bread. I mean, it didn't cost $1. I'm just like saying that as an example. Maybe it cost $1,000 or $3,000 now. So you see how the people were pretty upset and they were looking for anything that would make a difference. Unfortunately, Hitler came along and said, "Hey, I'm going to make everything right again." And people were so desperate, they listened to him and believed him. And then on top of that, he blamed all the problems on these people that he demonized. Like he said, "Oh, it's the problems with the ethnic groups, the religious, the Jews, homosexuals, disabled people, people that are too well educated. We need to get rid of these people so that we can create the master race and no longer have these problems, not have our economy dragged down by them." In particular, I think, as you know, like half of the people who died in these camps that the Germans set up ended up being the Jews. 6 million Jews died, and I think 6 million other people from these other groups that I mentioned died. During this time period, they were either put to death in these camps or they died because the conditions there were so horrible. There was so much disease and starvation, that or it was too cold, like they didn't have heat, and it was just really brutal and terrible. But he blamed all the problems on these groups of people, and so was able to round them up. And it was kind of like that metaphor, like where you put what is it? You put a crab in a pot, a live crab, and you turn the degree up, little by little, 1 degree by 1 degree by 1 degree by 1 degree until finally the crab is boiling. But because you're so slowly doing it that the crab doesn't notice, I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but whatever. It's a metaphor to describe how when countries or leaders can make changes so slowly, and not even necessarily slowly in Hitler's program, but he didn't come out with it all at once. He did one thing, like he took a little bit of liberty away, and then he did another, and people adjust themselves. Okay, this is the new normal. All right, but we're doing it in hopes that the country will get better, our lives will get better, the economy will get better, and then you take away another liberty, and then he'd take away another way, and people would readjust, recalibrate, and accept that as the new normal, and then he'd take another liberty away or do another horrific thing, or maybe not let people know about what he was doing so much, right? Because he controlled things like the press, and it wasn't like today's standards where we were able to share stories all over the world in the blink of an instant, right? No, or in the blink of an eye. Sorry, that was a terrible mixed metaphor, but yeah, it was a stranglehold on what was actually happening, and then he started invading countries. Like he would take over Poland, and then I think he took over the Sudetenland from the Czech Republic, or from Czechoslovakia. Things like where he would say, "Oh, well, these were historically part of our country. Because remember, Austro-Hungarian Empire, these are German speakers. They're part of us. We're just reclaiming what was ours." And so those were the kinds of arguments that he would make to convince people that what he was doing wasn't, so bad. It was normal, right? Kind of like what you hear with Vladimir Putin nowadays, saying, with Ukraine, and first it started with the Crimean Peninsula right there, and then now it's all of Ukraine. So it was arguments like that where, oh, well, it really belongs to us. Oh, they're German speakers. They really want to be part of us anyway, And so this is how he, by degrees, starts taking away liberty, starts invading countries, and people let him do it, right? Like they don't want him to do it maybe, but they don't protest enough to stop him, or they don't put up enough show of force to stop him, right? And so that's how we ended up with World War II, with all of these people being rounded up into concentration camps and death camps and being put to death. And with his taking over country after country after country, in a worldwide campaign to dominate and rule the world. So that's how he got away with it, until obviously he didn't, right? But he blamed all of their economic problems on the worldwide depression of the 1930s and the out of control inflation from the 1920s and the bad results from the end of World War One, and he would blame them on these groups of people, and on the treaty that ended World War One that took away so much land from Germany that he said, "Oh, we're entitled to." So that's how he did it. I mean, that's just in a nutshell how he did it. Obviously, it's much more complex than that. Anyway, World War II itself used scientific advances to depersonalize warfare and make it more efficient. No longer was there the quote unquote man to man combat that had marked so much of the world's previous warfare, and that perhaps in part reduced casualties in its efficiency and also had placed a human face on much of the destruction. So during World War One, you actually saw the people you were killing, right? Because things weren't as mechanized. And during World War Two, technology had advanced to the point where you could bomb towns, so you don't see the people you're killing, right? And so that's how it depersonalized the war. Like, if you're dropping a bomb, maybe you don't feel as badly about a town you're destroying, uh, than if you had seen the people that you were shooting. You just looked in their eyes and saw them. So, um, it this more well-developed warfare. I don't even like to say the word well, but it was advanced technology. Um, it in part reduced casualties, right? Because it was so efficient that it didn't maybe get as many uh, non-targeted civilians, but it placed it would take out whole towns, right? So there got to be a lot of collateral deaths there. The warfare of World War II had become much more systematized and impersonal. Firebombings caused mass destruction in towns. While the nuclear bomb, yes, the nuclear bomb was invented during World War II, that was used on two towns and wiped them out completely, or wiped them completely off the map: Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. So science and technology had progressed to where they could do very much good in the easing and prolonging of life. However, on the other side of the spectrum, science and technology could also do great harm on a grand scale. Still reeling from the horrors of war and mass death, the United States properly anesthetized itself. So this is after the World War II ended. You know, essentially, we had defeated Germany. Italy had already switched sides in 1943 after Mussolini died. I think he was killed, yeah, assassinated, and then they switched to the Allies side at that point because I think they realized, oops, we're maybe not going to win here. So we defeated Germany. D-Day pretty much took care of that. And then with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, finally, Germany had already thrown in the towel. So with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's when Japan surrendered to, and that was the end of the war, August 6th and August 9th. That's when they were bombed in 1945. All right, now, and on the other side of the spectrum, oh no, sorry. So still reeling from all the horrors of war and the mass death, the United States properly anesthetized itself with what poet Robert Lowell called the tranquilized 50s. So you know what a tranquilizer is? It's to make you kind of go to sleep, to ease maybe your fears and lull you into a false sense of security or into a sleep. So to keep in check the socialism of FDR's programs, the communism that looked so appealing to depressed Americans and the radical labor movement that responded to mass unemployment, the 1950s actually counter-reacted from that. Like that worked in the 1930s, but now, you know what? 1950s was quite a departure from that time because the economy, like World War II, had kind of jump started the economy, put all these people back to work, so to speak, because they went and served in the military. The women that were left behind went and worked in the factories, kind of like what they did in World War One, but much on a much greater scale, because these factories were ramped up too to make all the ammunition and the munitions for the war. Because I told you there was all this advancement in technology, so that also put a lot of people to work. Either the men that were left behind that didn't serve over there, that were too old or whatever, infirm, and then the women, the mothers, the wives, things like that were left behind, or the single women even, they uh they went to work in the factories often. So that drove the economy. And then the people that were serving in the war were getting paid, and then they had benefits when they came back from having served in the war. And so a lot of them went to college, and that gave better education to people. And that drove, and all the technology that came about during the war, that continued going after the war. And when people were becoming more educated, then that also led to advancing technology. So the economy was humming at this point in the 1950s. And so communism that looked appealing to depressed Americans during the 1930s and the Great Depression, no longer, we didn't need big socialist programs because people, families, and earners themselves were doing so much better. And so you had the counter reaction to that, which was the Red Scare, absolute panic over communism, right? Anything socialist or communist sounded horrible, right? It was demonized um, by the American public. Joseph McCarthy's Red Scare and the House on Un-American Activities Committee really drove a lot of that fear and panic over communism. That's why it's called the Red Scare. So red meaning the color associated with communism. We were just anything was like triggering America that had to do with that. And for good reason, in a sense, because Stalin, who was the leader of Russia, started creating the Soviet Union at this point. He started taking over countries. And he was given half of Germany. At the end of World War II, the U.S. took half of Germany and said, all right, we're going to control this half. And Russia said, we'll take over the other half. So that became East Germany, that what Russia had. And what the United States had became West Germany. And we said, we're not going to let this country run itself right now because it did such horrific things during the war. So we are going to control how the country's run. Now, so Joseph Stalin, at the time, people didn't realize what horrors he was doing in his own country. He kept those under the radar. And if the world had known, it probably would not have given half of Germany over to the supervision of Germany. I mean, not of Germany, the supervision of Russia, because it then established the Soviet Union and took away so many civil liberties and killed people, like so many people. Actually, I want to say Stalin killed like 50 million of his own people. So a lot more than Hitler. If you're just looking at the concentration camps for Hitler and the death camps, where he killed 12 million. So, and Stalin started taking over countries, like putting in revolutions and coming in and taking them over themselves, and just they were falling kind of like dominoes over in Eastern Europe under the control of the Soviet Union, and then branching into Asia, right, where Russia and China became, partners because they were both communist. I don't know if you want to say it's a happy partnership, but at least alike in their political philosophies, and then China started, doing similar things, trying to install communist governments in other countries in Asia. And so there was this mass takeover in Eastern Europe and Asia of these countries, and it started spreading to other countries, even started, you had communist revolutions happening down in Africa, not for many more years later, because it was still kind of colonies at that point, some of the European countries, all those